U.S. coronavirus deaths continue to climb, but President Trump is still busy blaming everyone else. One U.S. professor says Trump's tactics will implode. Why? And other U.S. politicians are also piling on charges against China. Why is scapegoating others for political gain so alarming? Welcome to this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. The big lie of the Trump administration is that China is the cause of America's problems, writes Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development of Columbia University. In his recent opinion piece, Trump's anti-China theory implodes. He warns of the Trump administration's reckless and dangerous charges against China, arguing that these claims could push the world into conflict, just as the Bush administration's lies about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq pushed the U.S. into war in 2003. He also compares Trump to Senator Joseph McCarthy, who used lies and innuendos to scare Americans into submission, he writes. What prompted Dr. Sachs to write this piece, and is his message making an impact? I was joined by Dr. Sachs via Skype to find out. Professor Sachs, thank you very much for accepting our interview. Recently, you wrote an article called Trump's Anti-China Theory Implodes. I want to ask you, what prompted you to write such an article, and what's the message you want to send?
I've been very concerned with the Trump administration's repeated attacks on China rather than focusing on solving our problems within the United States. Our epidemic continues at a very dangerous level. The president has done a terrible job, I'm afraid, so we still have around 2,000 deaths every day, and the virus continues to spread in many parts of the United States. But instead of doing his job properly, he's spending more of his time attacking China for political reasons, to try to shift the blame, or because he thinks that somehow this appeals to his political base. But it's quite dangerous, obviously, and I believe that he and the Secretary of State, Pompeo, have made charges repeatedly without evidence, and if they actually believe what they say, they should be showing the evidence. I don't believe what they're saying, and yet our Secretary of State has said he's got huge evidence. And when the Chinese government said, well, you're bluffing, show us the evidence, he didn't show any evidence. So this is a big concern to me, because unfortunately we have a history in the United States of making false arguments, and I think that that can be very dangerous. If there's any truth to it, let's find out, but if it's just political arguments, it's very, very dangerous to make these statements.
Do you think they're genuinely suspecting about the origin of this virus, or are they trying to do something else? For instance, there has been a lot of criticism of how they have handled the situation. Indeed, the death toll has been extraordinarily high, the highest in the world, and continues to be so. So what do you think is driving this administration to go after all of these theories? And this is not the first theory we're hearing, right? We have been hearing a whole host of things, from calling this virus a China virus, a Chinese virus, now this origin thing. What do you think have been driving them to do that?
I think there are two interrelated reasons. Of course, even before this epidemic, the Trump administration was attacking China at a very repeated basis, making all sorts of attacks on trade and technology, and claims that the Chinese government was manipulating the currency or cheating or stealing intellectual property or spying or other things. These claims were grossly exaggerated all the time. but it was part of a U.S. strategy, in my opinion, to try to diminish China's economic success or the development of China's technologies. Because part of the American foreign policy idea is that the U.S. should have no rival. But China is a very big, successful, technologically advanced country, and so it's viewed as a rival by many. It's not viewed as a cooperative partner because the attitude in many parts of U.S. politics is there should be no competitor. So this is my interpretation over many years. I've written a book about this recently called A New Foreign Policy Beyond American Exceptionalism, where I said to my American counterparts that one should accept the success of other parts of the world, not as a threat to the U.S., but as a natural part of how the world works, because talented countries are going to be able to develop new businesses, new technologies, and for a large, great civilization like China, there's every opportunity for this kind of progress. But this has been one of the main motivations of the Trump administration since it came into office, was to try to diminish China's success. The other related feature is that Trump is running for re-election. He is, in my opinion, a very incompetent man. I regard him as the worst president in American history. And we now have more than 80,000 deaths from this virus. China, only around 4,000. So the United States has something like 20 times more. And that's because the government is not competent to stop the epidemic. And so the second reason is blaming China to try to deflect the political attacks that are rightly coming to Trump for his political failures. These two go together because many people among Trump's voters believe the worst about China because they hear propaganda every day. And this is very sad and very dangerous because our country should be cooperating with each other. There is so much to cooperate on. There is also the benefits of trade and cultural knowledge and all the rest, but Trump is trying to undermine that.
So in your article you said they, meaning the administration and the other politicians following their footsteps, they could push the world to conflict, just as the Bush administration's lies about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq pushed the U.S. into war in 2003. Do you really see that kind of possibility playing out? And what brings these two scenarios, these two incidents, similar towards against each other?
Anytime one country makes harsh attacks on another country, if those attacks are false, that creates a tremendous amount of animosity and a tremendous potential for conflict, hopefully just verbal conflict. But when countries really distrust each other, especially powerful countries, bad accidents can happen. Throughout U.S. history, we have seen this, that the U.S. government has lied on many occasions when it has wanted to pursue an aggressive foreign policy. And those lies have often turned into something quite worse, either a very dangerous confrontation or even a war, as I mentioned in the case of Iraq, when the Bush administration lied about whether Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. I am not predicting anything terrible like that, but I am warning people that it's not right for Pompeo to say he has overwhelming evidence if he doesn't have overwhelming evidence. If he doesn't have evidence at all that's good. And so if senior people like the President or the Secretary of State, are going to make such strong assertions, they ought to make them only on the basis of evidence. I talk to a lot of scientists who say what they're saying is almost impossible. When we don't see any evidence and it's said that it's almost impossible, and even when American allied countries like Australia reject this claim, you know probably that they're lying. And that's what I fear, because Trump lies a lot, and Pompeo lies a lot, and this is a very dangerous thing to be lying about.
It seems that their narrative, their rhetoric, goes a long way in a not so small section of the American population. And that is the frustrating part. That is also, I believe, on your side as well as on the Chinese side. We feel that it's so obvious that a lot of the things that they're saying are not well founded, and yet it seems that they're just getting their way because they're in the airwaves all the time and they repeat the same thing. They repeat 1,000 times a lie, and for some people who are not as well informed as you or I am, then it could become very plausible. So how do you look at this dilemma?
Well, it's a standard trick. If you control the airwaves, you control a lot. And in the United States, Trump repeats this over and over again. Lots of people believe it. And then, unfortunately, even the other political party, the Democratic Party, doesn't want to seem soft on these issues, so it joins the same attack. And this is easily manipulable inside the U.S. All I can suggest in general is, of course, that the Chinese authorities should be as open and transparent as possible in every way. I am glad that the Foreign Ministry of China issued a detailed statement going through each of the charges and explaining why, in the view of the Chinese government, it was not possible, and presenting evidence. And I think that this is an important thing to do. I do think that this is an opportunity for all of the countries in the Asia-Pacific region to work together and to be very transparent with each other. And actually, one of the things that's very important and heartening is that China stopped the epidemic in China. There are still a few outbreaks, but basically, and very remarkably, China stopped the epidemic. And most of the countries in the region have kept the epidemic to a very low level, or even stopped the transmission, like New Zealand, like Australia, like Korea, like Japan, and most of the countries in the ASEAN group also. And so my recommendation is don't pay so much attention to the U.S. because it says strange things, especially during an election year, but work together with the countries in the region and make the whole Asia-Pacific almost free of the virus. And then countries could trade with each other, travel with each other, open up. And this would be absolutely wonderful if the Asia-Pacific was able to eliminate the epidemic first, open up business, open up trade, and travel with each other. That would be very inspiring for the whole world, and also very good for all the countries, of course, in the Asia-Pacific.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break, and we'll be back right after that.